And then,
Go on.
what I wanted to go over today was mostly sharing a brand new guide that we've put together over the past year. And it was through an effort sparked by Diane Bailey at Menlo Spark. So she worked with Redwood Energy with Sean Armstrong, Emily Higbee, and Dylan Anderson over there, and set up a project where we wrote our fourth guide together. This was the most intricate one. It's about the retrofitting of buildings, and it's intricate because it has a lot of different things that happen when you get ready to. Oops. Let's go back to that. When you get ready to electrify a building, there's a lot of different paths you can take. So we had to explore all kinds of things. It involved a lot of authors, so you see a lot of us on the page there. In fact, some of the folks you probably know were on this page. All right, the benefits, as Gary started to mention, the benefits of all electric design in the home are health. And Gary went over that. Also safety, fewer burns, fewer explosions, fewer fires. There are some wealth impacts. It's going to be hard to get rich electrifying your home, but it really helps if you have solar. Then the whole thing gets pretty cost effective. I've noticed since I've switched to a heat pump on the comfort side, my house is a lot more comfortable. We're able to keep the temperature a lot steadier, and it doesn't have that natural gas chemical fired rocket going on and off all the time, jerking the temperature around. And then as Gary mentioned, there's lots of climate benefits too, especially given the clean electricity that our area has from Silicon Valley Clean Energy and also from Monterey Bay, or I guess it's now Central Coast Community Power. And then up here where I am, Peninsula Clean Energy. All of those entities provide carbon-free energy as at least an option. And in some of our territories, it's the basic product. All right. So, some recent news that's come out is the latest carbon budget for how are we doing on trying to stay under 1.5 degrees Celsius rise. It turns out if we were to keep our gas-fired devices like our cars and our current furnaces and water heaters, and we decide we're going to, as good environmentalists, we're going to use them up, because we never want to waste anything. Their emissions from using up all those existing devices will push us over 1.5 degrees Celsius rise. And so that's kind of bad news. And then it gets a little bit worse. If we replace any of those gas things with another gas thing, we will go over the 2 degrees Celsius rise, which is a worse situation. So it really tells us we need to not replace any more gas devices with gas devices. Every time something burns out, we need to replace it with an electric one. So that's our fresh hope, that there are all electric ways to do things. And so I'll share a couple little case studies and then some products. The case studies, you'll see lots more of this in our 90-page guide, and it's a free guide. You can download it from the internet. I'll show you the site. But there's case studies in there of families and groups that have retrofitted homes. In fact, this one is down here in the bottom is Steve Schmidt's water heater and garage. And the interesting thing he's doing here in this plywood box area is it's a circuit sharing device that takes turns. When he's using his cooktop, the heat pump water heater is paused and it's not recharging during that time. And then when he's done cooking, the water heater resumes charging up its temperature and storing it away. Because in a way, a water heater's a big thermal battery. It's an easy way to store energy. The guide is full of case studies from all around the country. Some of the tougher climates are back east, and Ohio is one of the tough climate. It's not too sunny there, and it's pretty cold for a lot of the year. So, and then hot. And so we've got a number of case studies in there that show how much people are spending to retrofit a home and to take out the gas meter. And some of the cost categories that were pretty big in that tough climate. Doing a total building shell rehab and insulating the building shell and windows was a lot of the cost back there. And it doesn't have to be much cost out here because of our gentler climate. But then the other big spending area was on the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning equipment there. it's not as big a spending item out here again, because in our climate, we don't need as much equipment to get it done. But one of the things they're finding now is they can use cold climate heat pumps and do building shell upgrades and get much more comfort than they started with. And this is an old house, 120 years old, and it worked out for electrification. And then here's an example closer to home in the San Francisco Bay Area. And this one's actually my house, so I'm pretty familiar with it. And so it's a do-it-yourself example. And so I used over here on the left, this was one of the first things I learned about when I was just a reader of the guides was a window heat pump. And so it's shown here in this row. It was about $400, and it just plugs in the wall. It took me maybe 15 minutes to a half hour to get the whole thing installed. The other thing was a do-it-yourself mini split heat pump down here. This thing that looks like a suitcase with a fan on it. And then that was about $1,600, and it already has a pre-charged line set, so I'm able to just get it charged, or just to hook the line set up to the outdoor unit. And I just had to pass the line set through a 3-inch hole that I was able to drill up high in my wall and mount the indoor unit over it. And then in the bottom left, here's our new cooktop. I'm really enjoying that. It's an induction cooktop, so it has a smooth cover. And one of the things I notice is you get a lot more working space in the kitchen. You can see the pot is there and the wooden spoon is next to it. It's all smooth. I could never set anything down on my gas grill top because everything would fall through the grill and or burst into flames if I set it too close. But here on the cool induction cooktop, I can set it right there. And the induction cooktop is great because it only heats the pot. It doesn't heat all the other materials around there. So let's see, other things in here. I found it wasn't too hard to do a do-it-yourself heat pump water heater, but I'd already practiced some 240-volt circuits from volunteering with Sunwork. And so I was able to just go to the hardware store, buy the water heater, and in a few hours of labor, get it installed. And anyway, this is my last project to do, is the combined washing drying machine, single machine that you put dry, dirty clothes into, and then you come back and you get dry, clean clothes out of it. So without having to hurt your back in between to move the clothes over, if you remember to move them over. So anyway, that's an example of one of the case studies in there. We also are starting to figure out, what do we have to do with contractors to get them more comfortable switching over? Because in California, they've got a long history of just installing gas devices and then getting to sell you a separate air conditioner if your climate changes and you start needing cooling now and then. So, but getting them to switch over, instead of selling one device to do the heating and a second device to do the cooling, getting them to start selling these two-way heat pumps where the same machinery can heat the house in the winter and cool it in the summer. So this 90-page retrofit guide has a lot of it is devoted to the product guide. And so, it goes over the electric cooking options, the heat pump water heaters, electric dryers, including my favorite, the combined washer dryer single machine. I'm not talking about a stacked machine. It's one machine, does both jobs. Here's the heat pump, does both jobs. It's got a section on electric vehicles, a nice table comparing all the different models, energy management systems, PVs, backup batteries, and then some of the luxurious living devices like electric fireplaces, electric outdoor heating. Anyway, all kinds of good stuff in there. But I want to kind of start at the high carbon impact, not many dollars impact side of it. So I'm going to drop down to the regular plug in the wall type of machinery, like the window heat pumps. So these are 120-volt solutions. They plug right into a regular socket, like this one in the middle, this Frigidaire heat pump I bought, a window heat pump. It's just like a window air conditioner, but inside it, it's got a reversing valve. So it can heat me in the winter and cool me in the summer. There are other, more, well, actually, let's see, these two here, Friedrich and Frigidaire, those are both window units. This GREE unit can be built right through the wall. And then this Innova unit is inside the room. And what it does is it uses two 6-inch holes drilled through the wall, and it breathes in outdoor air to grab the energy from it and then breathes it back out to the outside after it's, say, extracted some heat from outdoor air to make high temperature heating for the house. So those are kind of interesting units that are self-contained. So we call them unitary or packaged systems. Then the next type, we hear a term like mini split. Mini usually means this kind of suitcase profile for the outdoor unit that you see on these these middle 5 pictures. So mini, it refers to kind of that suitcase profile, and then split means there's a separate outside unit and a line set going to an inside unit. Here's an example of the inside unit. It kind of looks like a car bumper thing. It's up on the wall. If you can see into my house on the camera view, there, I'd be showing you mine up there. I can't tell if you would see it, but I'll show it to you later. Anyway, there's also then combined, in the bottom row, there are combined heat pumps and heat recovery ventilation systems. So they ventilate your house, they exhaust the say winter, the warm air from your house that's stale, and they extract all the heat out of it and put it into incoming fresh air that they would provide. So those are some of the interesting units. Then here's something that you're starting to see more at the hardware store, and they're portable heat pumps. And there are 2 basic types. And notice that we talk about dual hose, meaning it has 2 hoses. And that type can work and actually do well to heat or cool a room or 2 of your house. But the single hose versions, I wouldn't bother getting a single hose version, because what those do is they exhaust air out of your house, and then that means it's just drawing a vacuum on your house, and then cold air is leaking into all the other rooms. And so a dual hose one will keep the pressure balanced because it's bringing in outside air, extracting the heat from it, and exhausting that air back out without dragging in cold air to leak into your house anywhere else. Anyway, so if you get interested in these portable heat pumps, look for one that has 2 hoses, a dual hose. Then we're also starting to work on a new type of technology. We've been working in a group, mostly California and Oregon and Washington, water heating folks like myself are working together in the Advanced Water Heating Initiative to promote new 120 volt plug in the wall, regular plug heat pump water heaters. And the first models will be coming out this spring and summer. And they'll be able to install it without a high voltage circuit. So you just plug that in, but down in the bottom right, in case you need a water heater before those others are available this summer, there are the 240 volt 15 amp versions of the water heaters. And that one can leave some panel space for you. Here's Sean liked to put in these really fancy induction ranges in the guide, and so they're kind of fun and colorful to look at, but a lot of the induction ranges look a lot more normal and plain. There's ventilation. Here's some countertop cooking that's in the guide as well, including these portable induction cook units that you can borrow from Actera. And then we've got a section on the washing and drying machines, including my favorite, the combined one. And then there's also separate heat pump dryers if you want to use, if you're running more of a factory operation, you want to be running 2 machines at once. And then there's a little section on outdoor living. Hey, Sierra Club members, they love their outdoors. And so there's some pretty fun electric vehicles on the horizon. Then also we've got some low-cost resiliency solutions. The word generators here, but these are all battery systems that you can charge up or charge with solar panels and then have some stored energy for later. There's also light bulbs that have their own little batteries inside them, so the bulb will stay on after the power goes out to it. And then this one is kind of intriguing. I'm really looking forward to these products like this Osakio Decibel product. It's a 2-way electric vehicle charger. So it can charge your car from the house, and then if the power goes out, you can power your house from the car. It's able to go two ways. So that's actually what I'm hoping to do at my house instead of getting a separate wall battery. I'm interested in getting a battery with wheels under it at some point. All right, and the other part of the guide goes into this optional idea called the watt diet or amp diet. And I got the name from a friend of mine at Palo Alto Utilities. She was facing a big expense to upsize her electric panel. And it was going to take weeks of waiting also for the contractors to do the work and get it scheduled with the utility. She said, Tom, I'm having to go on a amp diet here. I'm looking at all kinds of devices to figure out what has the lowest amps. And that got me intrigued, and I started looking with her. And so we basically worked out the scheme of you want to look at the electric code and see how it counts the amps. And so when does it trigger having to go up to another size panel, a larger electric panel? And so, this is down into the weeds, but if you like reading the National Electric Code, it's kind of fun. I've condensed it here for panel sizing. Basically, the first 8,000 watts of devices in your house get counted at 100% of their load. But then if you have more devices hooked up, those are only counted at 40% because the code realizes you don't turn on everything in the house all at once. And so, then when you get to heating or cooling, whichever's the larger one, that one is counted 100%. So it's kind of a bias. We really want to try to save on the heating and cooling wattage, and that'll get us the most leverage in staying on our electric panel. So the two main strategies of not putting in so many electric devices that you have to upsize your panel. The first one is just looking at the efficiency of the devices using that, like I said, that 15 amp water heater versus the common 30 amp water heater. So that's the power efficiency type of solution. And other places, I'll show you some other spots where that power efficiency really shows up. The second strategy would be to use power controls, like I showed you that one that Steve Schmidt had plugged in where either his cooking is happening or his water heater is charging, but they take turns. So either use efficient devices or controls or a mix of the two strategies. And then this graph here, hopefully you can see some of it. I won't spend too much time on it, but in the upper section, it's about space heating. And it shows how much these different devices count on the electric panel as creating a load. And the one up here at the top, the zero counting, that was my plug-in heat pump, window heat pump. Because it's just a regular appliance I plug in the wall, the building inspector doesn't count it as a new big old load on the house. It's just one more thing I could have done. And so it's part of the underlying regular load of the house. And then down at the bottom end of the spectrum, we've got two things. One is the second to bottom row is having a central 3-ton powerful heat pump for heating and cooling the home. And that's good for, about 2,000 or 2,500 square feet of home. And then the one that's even bigger than that is if it's got resistance heaters, they call it strip heaters inside it. And in our climate, you don't really need strip heaters. But one of the problems with electrification is it's been advancing quickly, and lots of people know the old myths. And the old reality was that heat pumps weren't that good in the old days, in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. They weren't that good. And you needed strip heaters, especially in cold climates like Ohio. But now we've got these great heat pumps that don't need this. And so we can be on these 5,000 watt heat pumps or less and easily heat and cool our homes. Anyway, then this section was heat pump water heaters. You can see the variation in how powerful they are versus, so how much panel ampacity they're occupying. Same thing, there's options for cooking. And then for the laundry, the different options for whether it's the combined machine that adds no new amps for drying or a resistance dryer. And then different options for vehicle chargers. Like if you just plug your EV charger into the regular 110 volt socket, it doesn't count as any new amps on the house. So it doesn't, make the building inspector tell you you need an upsized panel. Or if you want more and more powerful charging, it will count on the panel. And so you can save up some space for that. Represented down here backwards in the green is a couple of those power saving circuits that would share the power between two different devices. All right. And then this is just an example of 2,200 square foot homes, 4 of them. And notice this 24 kilowatt level, 24,000 watts. That's the amount of power you can get through a 100 amp panel, which is our regular old style electric panel. And so it's just like those 3 bars in the graphs I was showing you above, pretty much. We've got somebody's picking things that are a little too big a load, so they might have to upsize. And then this one is picking all the most efficient things, and they've got plenty of space left over. And then there's the baby bear is just right, and that kind of case. And so I looked at that one and said, oh yeah, but what if somebody wanted some more, like a more powerful cooking, a more powerful EV charging, and you can just snug up right up next to that 24 kilowatt load line, and then that's where you might want to set your design. So anyway, there's lots of different ways to go about it, and the guide shows you different approaches. If you're trying to stay on your old electric panel to save that $3,000 and 3 to 6 months of contracting time. Here's an example of what the amp diet might look like on a panel. And so the original blue circuits for most of the house loads we didn't mess with are up at the top of this circuit or this diagram. And they're just showing things going to plugs and lights and the refrigerator, things like that. And then a couple of the choices we made in this diagram to stay on the 100 amp limit of, and this was a 2,000 square foot house staying under 100 amps. We used one of those 15 amp water heaters. We did have space to put in a 5 kilowatt solar system and a 20 amp EV charger, and then heat pump heating, in fact, with separate forced air system. And so that was one of the ways to do it. Oh, and to get there, we used a heat pump dryer on the clothing. So that was one of the techniques. Then I thought I'd just show you, here's a page that out of the guide, the products that do some of that circuit sharing, where 2 different devices can use the same circuit. So this one, actually there's one called Dryer Buddy. Yeah, there it is, Dryer Buddy. And it looks a lot like this new one called Split Volt, where it has a plug that goes into the wall, and then 2 outlets you can plug things into. So either the dryer gets power first, and then the car charger gets it after that. Then there's versions for the whole house, but these circuit sharers are in there, and their costs are laid out for them. And then here's an example of, down to the bottom right, using the circuit sharers to power a bigger house, 3,000 square foot house in the Bay Area on a 100 amp panel. And so, it looks like, that's also doable. The way we got there, we used a ductless heat pump on this side. And we still had a big solar system coming in, 5.8 kilowatt solar system. And we did a sharing where the electric resistance dryer and the heat pump water heater took turns. Whenever the clothes were drying, the water heater had to pause and wait. You still had hot water because it's still got a big tank of hot water. It might have 60 or 80 gallons of hot water. And then the other sharing was between the cooking and the EV charger. Most people are setting up their EV charger to not come on till midnight anyway. So most of the cooking's done. So there was never any real delay there. All right, so that was a bit about the retrofits. And then one of the nice tables in the guide is from the Ohio retrofit experience. And you can see, again, in the gray bars, the amount of energy or dollars they're spending on building shell improvements to make the house tighter in their tougher Ohio climates. And then a relatively constant amount of almost, about $10,000 or $11,000 they're spending on heat pumps for space conditioning. All right, and then to look at the cost examples for a do-it-yourself 120 volt attempt here in the Bay Area, you might, so these are cost increments. How much more did a window heat pump cost than a window? And so the window heat pump is only like a $200 premium. And also, actually, a mini split is about the same or cheaper than a furnace replacement to do it yourself. And so that's one of the interesting cost examples. Then there's also countertop cooking with crock pots and all that kind of stuff if you didn't have ovens. Then the new 120 volt heat pump water heaters that are coming up, I figure they'll have a cost premium compared to a gas water heater of over $1,000, but they're, because of incentives, that should be down to about zero. There are different incentives available in the Bay Area now. Then this amazing machine, the 4.3 cubic foot combined washer dryer, it's doesn't cost more than buying separate machines. It's about the same. And then we've all been seeing these electric vehicles. They tend to have a higher cost, but then there's lots of incentives that make it about the same at the same luxury class. So that's that type of thing. Then the other thing is, you've got, when you're thinking of retrofitting, you've got a whole lot of what I'll call discretionary costs. Things you can spend money on, and people tell me they have to spend the money, and I just have to believe them if they say that. But anyway, so panel upsizing, I find it's discretionary, that you can figure out how to stay with the existing panel if you really want to. Then having a separate clothes dryer, yep, you could do that, cost an extra $1,000. Using ductwork, you're putting in new ductwork in your house, that's doable, but it costs, $4,000 or $5,000. Having contractors do all your installation, you can do that, or you can learn to do it yourself, either way. Separate oven instead of a range. So a range is when you've got the cooktop on top and it's a slide-in appliance with the oven attached under it. So you can have a separate wall oven that costs an extra $1,000. You can put solar on your roof, and it's good for your wallet. It does add about $9,000 to the price. And batteries are optional too. They add about $8,000 or $9,000. And then you can always oversize your heat pumps, and plenty of contractors will give advice like that, but it costs money to oversize them. So I don't tend to recommend oversizing. Then there's, another way to look at it is just, these are trade-offs. And so what are the trade-offs that I'm thinking of doing? So it's the combined washing drying machine versus a separate dryer, using a combined range versus a separate wall oven. For a microwave, mine is in a cupboard. And so it's not built into the house, it's just set into a cupboard box, or you could have it on your countertop. But if you build it in, then it adds to the panel amps. And so these are all choices on what adds. The right side adds to the panel amps and might push us over the limit and make us have to get a new upsized panel. But the left side is ways we can save on the panel amps. Even under your sink, there's a smaller power disposals, garbage disposals, or bigger power, and they add into that panel calculation. Better insulation and air sealing means maybe you won't have to use ductwork, that you can have a couple of these mini split units and they heat your whole house. Or, if you also want to avoid the ductwork, you can maybe have more of the mini split heads. And then there's this other choice of using a larger heat pump water tank. So going up a size or two, instead of getting the 50-gallon heat pump water heater, maybe getting the 60-gallon or the 80-gallon. And that'll also save both on the power bill, and it'll let you use a smaller power water heater because it has a bigger battery with it, essentially a bigger thermal hot water tank. So I've come to be recommending that people use the biggest heat pump water heater that'll fit their space and their budget, because it does save energy. All right, the things to avoid is avoid any delay in doing this decarbonization. We need to get over this idea that I'm just using up my water heater's embodied energy, because every day you're doing that puts another 7 pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere, compared to the 0.7 pounds of new embodied energy if you were to get a new heat pump water heater and make society spend that 0.7 pounds per day to give you a new heat pump water heater. So we're comparing these things, they've got a 10-to-1 ratio. We're really kind of losing ground on the climate problem by keeping our gas-fired devices running. So then definitely avoid any fossil repeat device. Don't put in another fossil-fired thing. Don't strand anything. We know better now. So then avoid any single direction air conditioner. Always pick a double direction heat pump instead. It's an air conditioner that can heat you in the winter. And then if you want to stay on your current panel, just avoid the high power choices among your devices. So the things, those were the things to avoid. The things to embrace are hope and a sense of purpose, to make these projects kind of a fun project to work our way out of the climate problem. And really, we can all be the people needed to start this transition. And if not us, who are we thinking is going to start it? So the product guide can be found at redwoodenergy.net/research. And then the place I got my conduit and circuit training was just by volunteering with sunwork.org. And they're a kind of a fun local nonprofit that trains volunteers to install solar. But in the process of learning to install solar, I was learning to bend conduit and pull wires through conduit and connect wires up to circuit breakers and install the breakers in the panels. So thanks so much for going through that with me. And I'd like to turn it over to you, Bret.